Defending the Arctic. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Global News put out a piece today titled Canada Needs an Arctic Defense Strategy as Russia and China eye the North. To me, when I read that, it was a little bit shocking. It made me wonder, well, what exactly is Canada doing in terms of a defensive mechanism up there? Do they even have one? What's going on? So, the article says that we only really got alerted to the prospect of Russia and China meddling around in that area because the US Coast Guards this summer found China and Russia conducting joint military exercises in the Arctic Ocean. If we didn't stumble upon them, or if the Americans didn't see that, well, we would be operating under the obliviousness that we once had last year and the years prior. And there are reasons for that. Now, we'll get to it a little bit later, but doing something like monitoring these frigid areas without much of a population, it is difficult. So, on one hand, you are surprised to find Russia and China operating up there, but on the other, perhaps it was predictable with the lack of investment in safeguarding this region. So let's dive into that now. Why was it a surprise? The article cites even the American Coast Guards were shocked when they came across these joint military operations. Simply put, nobody's really paying much attention to the area, given the factors we just talked about. The underpopulated area, the bad climate, all of that. Now, we do have satellites, but most of them are oriented further south. So the question then comes up, why is that? Why should we even care? Well, that can be answered with two words: natural resources. From oil to fish to minerals, this area is packed with valuable things and it's right on Canada's border, and some of it is within Canada. Perhaps living in the Arctic isn't fun, but you can certainly gather a lot of desirable things there to take away, to bring back to wherever fun living exists. This next fact that I'm about to state, it goes over the head of many top officials in government, and the lack of urgency by which they've acted on this matter just spells that out. It's very important to note that Canada contains about 20% of the world's total freshwater resources. And as we advance into the future, and we know that things like water shortages are predicted, it's no wonder that China and Russia are playing around in this area where much of that fresh water is congregated, near and often spilling out into the Arctic. Further, Canada is the second largest country in the world in terms of land mass. That's a lot of resources there, and you combine that with the fact that we're only something like the 40th most populated, meaning there's not a lot of people with their eyes open. So you can sneak around and do things behind the scenes when the satellites and the population aren't there to watch you. And only when the American Coast Guard finds you, then do we go, oh, really? They're doing that? It shouldn't be a surprise. Look at how valuable of an area this is. Now we get to summarize these factors and paint a clear picture. First of all, tons of valuable resources including large amounts of water, which experts argue will be what future world wars are fought over. Then you have massive amounts of land, especially up north near these Arctic regions, that are not populated and thus not monitored very closely. Then look at Canada, a region that encompasses much of that territory. A tiny population, which usually correlates to a weaker military simply due to supply issues. You don't have enough people. In terms of sheer manpower, we're not near the top. Then look at the fact that Canada has no nuclear weaponry of their own, and we have to rely on allies for any real defense. Canada is a jewel that lacks the protections needed to ensure it's safeguarded. It's not really a wonder why Russia and China are running military exercises in the area, in the Arctic. They have reason to prepare for what-if situations that call for battle there. They're familiarizing themselves with the territory, and they're only doing that because they understand the value, and they understand that if in the future they need to be there, they want to be prepared. They don't want any surprises. They want to be familiar. And that's really the essence of military practice operations, like what they're doing. They're getting the lay of the land. Now, there is some nuance needed here. I'm clearly not saying that tomorrow we're going to be going to war over the icebergs in the Arctic. What I'm saying is that this poses a real threat. A threat that might materialize in the future. And I do agree with the article here, posted by the Globe, that we have to do something. We have to start putting up deterrences to what's going on. Otherwise, we're ceding too much of an advantage to these geopolitical threats. Naturally, protecting and securing the North isn't free. And here's where much of the cost-benefit analysis comes in. Maintaining anything in the Arctic is hugely expensive due to the extreme climate. If something gets broken, well, first of all, you have to develop items and equipment that can survive the harsh temperatures. And if something breaks down, people have to go out there to fix it. It's remote territories, quite harsh. The costs are going to add up quite substantially. And the national debt in Canada has been a problem for some time. And now you tack on all the COVID expenses, people will naturally ask, well, can we afford it? My reply would be, you have to find a way to afford it. It's far more important than some of the other things we're spending money on. Then, at the same time, you have to grapple with the realities of Canada's nuclear inadequacy. We don't have the means of proper deterrence in the 21st century. Without nukes, you're somewhat at a disadvantage, and that's why so many companies strive for them. Did I say companies? I meant countries. Now, look at someone like Kim Jong and North Korea. A horrendous regime, and one of the only reasons they've been able to go about unfeathered is due to their nuclear arsenal. Nobody wants to mess with that. People will be very cautious about getting too close to them. Because the dangers of a nuclear war, it's too much to think about. People don't want to find themselves in that situation, so they're going to act accordingly. There's a bit of game theory there. Something like a mutually assured destruction is going to keep rational actors from delving too deep into conflict. Now, I'm not saying that Canada and every other country should start developing nukes. I think it's actually a bad thing to have these weapons of mass destruction. It's simply the reality, though, that they do exist, and they are major deterrents to problems. And Canada not having any is somewhat of a disadvantage. That's the truth. Now, once you understand that, then you can talk about, well, what do we do? One of the main things that keeps us comfortable is our many alliances and treaties. If Canada wasn't a member of NATO, if America didn't have our back, if Canada was some other country, given the same situation, plenty of resources, so much water, all of that, I guarantee you we would have been invaded a long time ago by some country or another. We're lucky we have the good graces of our proximity to America and things like NATO to keep us safe, relatively. Now, having said that, just because we have the protection of big brothers, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything. First of all, with NATO, to even be a member there and to gain that shared protection, we have military commitments to meet. I think it's something like 2% of your GDP has to be spent on reinforcing your army. Canada, in my opinion, hasn't been doing too well at that. It's one thing to spend on your military, but there are better ways to do that and worse ways to do that. I remember reading reports like our sidearms, our tanks, our submarines, stealth flyers, they're all outdated. So you do have to wonder where that money is going. What exactly are we doing here? And are there ways to better utilize that to create a defense force that can actually do something here? It's very different to have a completely unguarded Arctic territory where Russia and China can do whatever they want. It's not like America and NATO will start bombing them for running military exercises. But if Canada does have submarines and bases stationed there, you can put up blockades, you can have your fleet in that area. That would be a deterrence because China and Russia aren't going to want to find themselves in this situation where you guys are playing chicken with each other. Why? Because they know the outcome there would be something like a full-scale war. If something happens that is perceived as an attack against Canada, it's the NATO nation's responsibility to fight. They're not going to want any piece of that. But when you have literally no defenses, though, they can do whatever they want. Even a single ship, cruiser, submarine could be enough of a deterrent to scare them away from the area. But we have nothing. There's a big difference there. Now, this next thing I'm going to talk about is going to spell the picture of the Arctic territory. So let's start with the Russian front. President Vladimir Putin has been pouring resources into Russia's north, according to the article. It has 13 military airfields, top-of-the-line anti-aircraft missile batteries up there, and they've been sending a new generation of submarines to its northern fleet. Thousands of combat troops have been posted to new or refurbished Cold War-era bases along the Arctic coast or on Arctic islands. Though it has been hard, they say, to figure out why, Moscow has even put tanks above the Arctic Circle. Now, ask yourself, so the article says, well, it's hard to explain why. Try and think about why they might be doing that. Why would they spend all of those resources, all of that money, putting tanks and fleets and soldiers in these areas if they aren't trying to account for something? And what would they be accounting for? Well, the possibility of the Arctic becoming somewhat of a super desirable spot to be in, and having that advantage of having those bases, having those people stationed there from the get-go. Well, it seems to make sense if you determine that it's going to be a jeweled spot, if you determine that it's going to be a point of interest for you in the future. Canada should be the one with the military operations and programs occurring, but we're not. Russia has taken something of an interesting position on the world stage right now. They operate behind the shadows, and that's created this facade where people take them lightly. It's a big mistake. Russia is no joke. Arguably, they're in the top 3 for world superpower status. And them combined with China, that's quite the formidable foe. America, if you want to say they're the top power, them versus any one of the others would result in the American victory. How about America versus 2 of those? It could be a very dangerous dynamic to play with. Russia truly is no joke, and I would advise Canadians to pay attention to what they're doing. Pay close attention to the ways in which they're operating, and you can better position yourself to respond to any potential problems that come out of it. The ways in which they're moving their troops and setting up bases, it should be clear to you that they have an interest in that area. And the military practice exercises are further proof of it. Now let's check out the Chinese front. So Beijing has 2 medium-strength icebreakers in that area. An icebreaker is just this type of vessel that can easily traverse through icy water. It breaks it up as it moves past it. Reports also indicate that they've been building and developing much more powerful icebreakers, a new generation of these vessels. And they've also said that they regard the North as an area for all countries to exploit. So they're challenging who actually owns it. And now we think it's a coincidence that they were running these joint military operations and developing vessels that can traverse these territories that were once regarded as hostile. The writing is on the wall here. If Canada and their allies don't start to wake up, we could very well find ourselves in a situation where there is encroachment into space that does not belong to China or Russia, where resources are being extracted, territories being taken over, and we're going to find ourselves in a strange situation. The best way to combat that is to put up deterrence now, to build those bases and to station those troops to ensure that any progress is tracked, first of all, that we're not being surprised and relying on coast guards by chance stumbling upon an exercise to even know about it, and having these units there are going to stop advancement. China and Russia are not going to steamroll and bulldoze a couple of Canadian submarines and ships to get into where they have to go. They don't want to trigger a war. But the fact that you have the doors open to this area is inviting them. And this just brings to mind, once again, the NDP party. If you might recall, we covered it before. There was a party motion within this federal political party to abolish the military in Canada. Take that in for a second. They actually voted on it. It was a real motion, and people in that party really thought it was a good idea. Now, there are many stories very plainly out in the open that can reveal to you quickly why that's a boneheaded maneuver and why that would be the silliest thing any country could ever do. But still, it was taken seriously. That's how far off into la la land some people are when it comes to geopolitical, global factors and entities in the world right now. It seems to me that the more polarized and the more hyper-focused a party becomes on particular issues, the less they're willing to pay credence to other things that do matter. The further left and the further right you go, the more honed in you become on a set of core policy issues, and everything else on the fringe gets ignored. The truth is, there's many individuals in government and many citizens who are myopic in this regard. They have coddled themselves into thinking that maybe there is no need for a military, and that's because of how relatively safe they've had it in their communities and whatnot. But as soon as you expand your horizons beyond your immediate borders, and you look around the world, within a couple minutes you'll understand why we need a military, why it deserves to be funded, and why we have to do more. Perhaps one of the confusions is that people associate military with these types of weird invasion type wars. That isn't always the case and doesn't have to be. We can simply have these forces acting in defense capacities, and that's good enough. We both lack offensive and defensive capabilities, but we simply have to get better at least one of those to be taken seriously. So like always, I'll keep you up to date on the latest developments here, and I do implore everyone to keep an eye on what's going on. Keep an eye particularly on Russia, as they're closer than China to our borders and the Arctic territories there. Any news about further military operations and a greater density of troops in that territory would be quite worrying. So with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. It'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.